Every defensive coordinator in the WNBA spent the entire offseason building the same blueprint: trap Caitlin Clark at half court. Face guard her the moment she crosses the logo, physically disrupt her rhythm at every opportunity, and force the rest of the Indiana Fever roster to beat you in a 4-on-3 situation. That blueprint took months to construct. Entire defensive schemes were designed around its execution. Raven Johnson dismantled every single one of them in 9 minutes. The Indiana Fever traveled to Barclays Center for what the mainstream basketball media had already scripted as a defining moment for the New York Liberty. The Liberty have engineered their roster to championship specifications, and this offseason they assembled the most physically imposing defensive front line in the entire league. We are talking about Breanna Stewart, one of the most complete forwards in the history of women's basketball. Jonquel Jones, a former MVP with the versatility to stretch the floor and dominate the post simultaneously. And standing near 7 feet tall, Hanju, the international force of nature acquired specifically to patrol the paint, alter shots at the rim, and make driving lanes as treacherous as possible for any guard attempting to attack Indiana's interior. The mainstream media expected the Fever to absorb a physical beating and survive purely on Clark's individual genius. Instead, the Indiana Fever walked into one of the most hostile arenas in professional basketball and scored 109 points against a championship defensive front line. The implications of how they did it should be reshaping every opponent's preparation calendar right now. If this kind of analytical breakdown is what brought you here, hit that like button right now. That one click tells us you want this level of investigation after every single Indiana Fever game this season. And we are far from done today. To understand why this game mattered beyond the final score, you need to understand the specific question the Fever's entire offseason was designed to answer. The question was not whether Caitlin Clark is an elite basketball player. That answer was delivered with statistical force during her historic rookie campaign. The question was whether Indiana has built enough architecture around her to make the team's offense function at an elite level, even when opposing defenses successfully run the Clark elimination blueprint. This blueprint is not theoretical. It was deployed against the Fever with measurable effectiveness on multiple occasions last season. Teams that committed fully to physically trapping Clark at the half-court line, forcing the ball out of her hands on every possession, held Indiana below their average offensive output repeatedly. The structural vulnerability was exposed with painful clarity. When Clark's individual production was suppressed, the Fever's half-court offense became dangerously reliant on individual shot creation from role players who were not yet consistently reliable enough to sustain an efficient attack. That player walked onto the floor at Barclays Center in the first half of a preseason game and answered the question with authority. What Raven Johnson delivered in 9 restricted minutes was not what the public-facing analysis anticipated. This is a first-round draft selection whose entire professional identity was constructed around defensive disruptiveness, her ability to jump passing lanes, fight relentlessly through screens, and deny opposing guards any comfortable rhythm. The skepticism about her offensive translation to the professional level was loud, specific, and well-documented. Could she run a professional level was loud, specific, and well-documented. Could she coexist alongside Caitlin Clark's gravitational pull without creating spacing complications? Could she be trusted with ball handling responsibility in high-leverage professional situations against championship-caliber defenses? Watch how she processes the game. The moment Johnson enters the offensive half, her decision-making is operating at a pace and accuracy that rookie players simply do not possess in their first professional minutes. She is not forcing action to prove herself. She is not overextending in an attempt to generate a highlight play. She is reading the Liberty's defensive rotation with quiet precision, identifying exactly where the coverage is overcommitting toward Caitlin Clark and delivering the basketball into Kelsey Mitchell's shooting pocket at the precise moment the window opens. That play requires a comprehensive understanding of professional defensive rotations that most rookies spend entire seasons developing. The coast-to-coast sequence defined her debut. Johnson secures the defensive rebound, and before the Liberty can begin their half-court defensive set, she is already at full speed attacking the open court. She goes directly at the heart of the Liberty's interior structure, splits Hanju and the Liberty forwards using pace and body control, and finishes the layup at the rim completely uncontested. That is not a design play. That is a player with genuine professional basketball instincts executing at full speed in the most hostile possible environment for a first professional appearance. In executing at full in 9 minutes, she stuffed the statistical sheet. assists, defensive plays, finishing at the rim. The raw numbers are interesting. What they represent is the real story. The tactical reality of what the dual point guard system does to opposing defenses goes deeper than surface-level analysis will capture. Every defensive blueprint built against Indiana last season operated on one foundational assumption. If you deploy enough resources to eliminate Caitlin Clark, the rest of the Fever roster cannot consistently manufacture quality shots on their own. That assumption has now been formally invalidated. When Johnson and Clark share the floor simultaneously, you are presenting every defensive coordinator with a choice that has no mathematically correct answer. Every defensive core commit to aggressively trapping Clark at the half-court line, and you are surrendering the half-court to a player who has now demonstrated the elite vision and execution speed to immediately punish that coverage. Johnson reads the rotating defense and finds Mitchell on the wing. She identifies the open corner for Sophie Cunningham. She attacks the collapsing paint herself when the lane materializes. The Clark trap is no longer a viable defensive strategy when the player reading and exploiting that trap has definitively proven she belongs in this league. Alternatively, if you back off Clark to neutralize Johnson's exploitation of the trap, you are restoring the perimeter spacing Clark needs to operate her signature pull-up three-point game, recreating the exact conditions under which she operated at historically efficient rates during her rookie season. There is no defensive middle ground available when both players share the court, and this system is in its absolute earliest developmental stage. The chemistry between Johnson and Clark will only deepen across hundreds of professional minutes together. Let us address the shooting performance before any inaccurate narrative establishes itself in the mainstream coverage cycle. Caitlin Clark went 2 for 10 from the field. Multiple instances of physical contact from Liberty defenders went uncalled by the officiating crew, visibly disrupting her rhythm at multiple junctures. Isolated from context, those shooting numbers represent an off night. Within the full tactical context of what Clark accomplished in that game, those numbers reveal something far more important about her value to this franchise. Consider what she produced despite the shooting difficulty. She attacked the paint aggressively and finished a technical floater over Liberty defenders in the opening minutes, a shot requiring elite footwork and the confidence to initiate contact at the rim under pressure. She distributed 4 assists to teammates operating in favorable positions, created entirely by the defensive attention she commanded on every single possession. The Liberty's defensive shell was in a constant state of rotation adjustment because of where Clark was positioned on the floor, regardless of whether she was actively running the offense or functioning as a decoy. And then there is the single number that defines this performance more accurately than any individual statistic. The Indiana Fever scored 109 points with their most dangerous offensive weapon, shooting 20% from the field. That is the mathematical definition of elite offensive grab, a player who distorts a championship-caliber defensive scheme so completely that her team scores at a historic pace even on her worst shooting night of the preseason is not a one-dimensional scorer. She is a systemic offensive force that opponents cannot neutralize through any available defensive approach. Every team in the 1BA must now prepare for 2 simultaneous scenarios against Indiana. The version of Caitlin Clark who is shooting efficiently from the perimeter, in which case the aggressive trap-heavy defensive scheme creates exactly the perimeter space she needs to convert at elite rates, and the version of Caitlin Clark who is not shooting well, in which case her gravity alone creates the same mathematical advantages for Johnson, Mitchell, and Cunningham. Both scenarios end with the Fever scoring. That is not a coincidence. That is Stephanie White's offensive design philosophy operating exactly as constructed. Now we want to hear from you directly. Drop your prediction in the comments below right now. Is the dual point guard system with Johnson and Clark the permanent starting configuration for the Indiana Fever? And did the defensive coordinators across this league just watch their entire offseason preparation become obsolete? Comment right now. We read every single response, and the analysis coming in from this community consistently sharpens what we bring you in future breakdowns. The enthusiasm for what the Indiana Fever accomplished offensively at Barclays Center cannot come at the cost of confronting what Stephanie White and her staff are examining in film sessions right now. Because despite the 109-point offensive explosion, there is a specific interior problem that must be addressed before the regular season, or it will resurface against championship-caliber opponents at the worst possible moments. The rebounding disparity in this game was not a minor statistical footnote. The New York Liberty out rebounded the Indiana Fever 34-27. That margin carries serious structural implications. In the Indiana Fever's offensive architecture, the defensive rebound is the foundational trigger mechanism of their entire transition offense. The Clark and Johnson fast break system operates at its most devastating pace when the defense instantaneously converts a secured defensive rebound into a full-court push. When the Fever fail to secure the defensive rebound into a full-court push, they are not simply conceding second-chance points to an elite offense. They are eliminating the very ignition mechanism that makes their own a team built for hyperspeed transition that cannot reliably secure defensive rebounds is operating with a fundamentally compromised engine. The player most directly responsible for the rebounding deficit was Han Ju. Her size, approaching 7 feet of genuine height, represents a physical dimension that simply does not exist anywhere else in the WNBA. In 22 minutes of action, she posted 20 points, a staggering offensive output for a center operating in preseason restricted minutes. She altered shots at the rim, changed the trajectory of interior plays, and physically overwhelmed Indiana's younger interior players on multiple possession sequences. Against Makayla Timpson and Maisha Hines-Allen, she was a genuine mismatch problem, not because Indiana lacks the talent to compete, but because her size creates defensive geometry that standard WNBA interior players were simply not built to neutralize. This is precisely where veteran basketball intelligence becomes the counterbalancing factor. While the statistics cannot fully capture it, Monique Billings executed a quiet masterclass in one of the most undervalued skills in professional basketball, interior positioning discipline. Billings does not match Han Ju's height. No one on the Indiana Fever's active roster did. But what she demonstrated on multiple possessions was a sophisticated understanding of body mechanics and leverage that allowed her to physically displace Han Ju from the restricted area despite a dramatic size disadvantage. She boxed out. She used anticipation angle to move a significantly larger player away from the most dangerous rebounding positions. Those plays will never generate highlight clips. They will never lead a box score. They will never lead a box score. They are, however, the exact foundational plays that separate championship programs, and Billings executed them against the most physically challenging opponent the Fever could have drawn. If she can replicate that level of physical discipline consistently against the WNBA's elite interior players throughout a full season, she will become an increasingly critical component of what this franchise is constructing. Now, we must confront the most uncomfortable reality facing the Indiana Fever at this specific moment. The franchise possesses one of the deepest, most athletically gifted training camp rosters in the entire WNBA. Multiple players who performed with genuine distinction in this game against the Liberty will not be on the active roster when the regular season begins, and the deadline for those roster decisions is arriving within the next 72 hours. Among the players fighting for roster survival with maximum urgency is Jessica Timmons. The late-round draft selection out of Alabama brought a specific offensive skill set to her preseason performance that is genuinely rare at the professional level. Her pull-up jumper operates off the dribble with a mechanically smooth release that does not compress under physical defensive pressure. Her free-throw mechanics are elite and reliable, the kind of consistent form that translates directly to late-game execution when the game is on the line. In a league where perimeter shooting reliability is a premium organizational asset, Timmons represents exactly the type of highly polished performer that rebuilding franchises outside Indiana's competitive window actively need. The organizational risk here is direct. If Indiana releases Timmons for salary cap considerations, she will not remain available on the waiver wire for more than hours. Teams operating in roster-building mode, franchises with the cap flexibility, and the roster need to absorb a polished perimeter shooter immediately. Will move on her the moment she clears waivers. The Fever would be investing training camp resources in developing a professional-ready offensive asset and then voluntarily handing that asset to a rival at no cost. In the context of a competitive window this wide, that category of organizational error carries consequences that extend beyond the single roster spot. And then there is the situation surrounding Justine Passat, and this one demands the full scope of examination it deserves. Passat is a 6'4" shooter. That specific combination of height and perimeter shooting execution is so rare in the WNBA that its value to an offensive system cannot be reduced to preseason statistics generated in restricted minutes. In the limited time she received against New York, Passat stepped onto the floor and converted 2 of 3 three-point attempts for 8 total points. Efficient numbers in any context, but the raw statistics dramatically understate what her physical presence actually does to opposing defensive rotations. When a 6'4" player positions on the perimeter with a reliable three-point shot and an elevated release point, standard contest mechanics simply cannot function. The contest window that professional defenders are trained to time, the jump, the reach, the hand positioning, is entirely disrupted by a release point originating significantly above the defender's natural defensive reach. The geometry of the basketball court changes when she is on the floor. If she had been given significant minutes against Liberty reserves in the second half, the mathematical projection is not complicated. Her efficiency against defenders, structurally unable to properly contest her release, would have produced a substantially larger offensive output. Before we continue, if this channel has become your primary source for what is actually happening in the WNBA beyond the mainstream narrative, consider joining as a member. Your support is what makes it possible for us to keep going this deep after every single Fever game this season. The front office now faces the kind of direct organizational choice that defines franchise trajectories. Retain a player whose skill set constitutes a genuine competitive advantage within the existing offensive system, at the cost of significant salary cap flexibility, or release her for financial reasons, and observe her immediately elevate the offensive ceiling of a rival franchise. The organizational cost of a missed roster decision during an open competitive window is not equivalent to the same mistake made during a rebuild. The Fever are not building toward contention. They are already there. Squandering a competitive roster asset for salary cap relief when the window is this open represents a fundamentally different category of organizational error. Caitlin Clark is 22 years old. Raven Johnson is a first-round draft selection in the opening weeks of her inaugural professional season. The backcourt synergy that materialized against the Liberty at Barclays Center represents the absolute earliest developmental stage of what this dual point guard system can become over time. They are operating on initial professional chemistry. They have not yet developed the deep situational awareness, the intuitive understanding of where the other player will be before a player will be before a play fully develops that elite professional backcourt partnerships build across years of shared experience together. Every repetition they log together in practice, every regular season game they play alongside each other, every film session where Stephanie White installs new wrinkles and counter-reads into the offensive system builds a partnership that outside analysis cannot yet fully project. Every team in this league now has a narrow window to watch the Barclays Center film and begin dismantling the defensive blueprints they spent months constructing. The Trap Clark scheme was the consensus answer to Indiana's offensive identity. The dual point guard revelation changes that equation fundamentally and immediately. The next critical question for this franchise is not the regular season opener. It is the roster decisions landing in the next 72 hours, how the front office navigates the Passat situation. The Timmons question and the final active roster construction will establish the full competitive ceiling for everything Clark and Johnson just proved is possible. If you want the full breakdown the moment those roster decisions are announced, make sure you are subscribed right now and the notification bell is activated. Every cut and every signing will be analyzed at exactly this depth, and while you are waiting for that coverage, the video queued up next is going to show you why the rest of the Eastern Conference should be significantly more alarmed today than they were yesterday morning. We will see you there.